Hey, what is up? Welcome back to another video slash live stream here on Free Will Photos. I know a lot of you have been asking, where have I been? And I've just been out and about doing things. So I have a lot of content and images that I'm going to be editing here on the channel. But most importantly, or I guess most recently, I just got back from Imaging USA out in Louisville, Kentucky, and it was a great time. For me personally, I got to meet a lot of great people, met a few people that are subscribed here to the channel. So thank you for coming and shaking my hand, saying what's up, for those of you who I did run into. But also had a great opportunity to meet some people that I have been following on YouTube. And, you know, I'm not like one of those starstruck people where it's like, whoa, it's that guy. But it was cool just to be able to talk to him and, you know, share notes on YouTube on content creation in general, as well as photography and what it is that we're looking for. The main purpose for me going to Imaging USA this time around was purely to get information on setting up my headshot business. So I went to a lot of the business classes that they were offering and things of, you know, helping usher in that business. So as I start to develop that, I'll be sharing that on the channel. But that is my goal for 2024, is to reopen slash, I guess, rebuild my headshot business and, you know, get profitable off of that. And then you'll see some of those images because I've updated my releases or my model releases. Now, with all of that out of the way, Imaging USA, as well as, you know, just where I've been, I will be back. It won't be a video every day like it was in December. All right. I'm going to be doing videos probably once a week, maybe twice a week, but you'll have some consistent content because I do need to put time into my business. And by the way, I'm a husband and a father, so I got to give my family and my job that I have full time that isn't photography or YouTube, I got to give that some attention. So all of these things are going to reduce the number of videos, but if I can get a video out, they will be out. What I will do is probably more live streams, at least for the next couple months, just because those don't require editing and, you know, it's a little bit more off the cuff and hopefully engaging. Now, with that being said, let's go ahead. One, if you want to get in contact with me, the best way is either through email, which is freewillphotos@gmail.com, or you can go to Vero and you can hit me up at Free Will Photos over there. Those are the two things that I'm monitoring the most. All right. I do have an Instagram account. I don't use it as much, even though Imaging USA exposed that everyone seems to be on Instagram except me. So maybe I will build that at some point, but I'm not overly concerned about building that right this second. With that being said, if you want to get a hold of me, email is probably the best way because I do check that multiple times throughout the day. And then Vero, I really only check that once a day. And I don't always respond as quickly. If you've left a comment on a previous video, well, I have gone and I have updated all of my comments or answered all of the comments that I had unanswered. So hopefully I'm caught up in the comment section. But if I missed a comment, just put it down in the comment section here. Say, hey, Chris, you missed my comment and I really wanted an answer. And then I'll get back to you. Or better, just shoot me an email and say, hey, I really got a question about this and need some help. And then I'll do this because that's actually where today's photo is coming from. And then last but not least, if you want to pick up ON1 Photo Raw or anything over at the ON1 store, consider using my affiliate discount code FreeWillPhotos20. It's going to save you some money when you go to check out. And I greatly appreciate it. You know, it does put a little bit of money in my pocket at no extra cost to you, but it helps me to invest in this channel as well as continue building the content. So let's go ahead and jump into the computer, because I think that is probably the best place to be right now. So if you caught any of my videos last week, you will have known, or I'm sorry, last month, you probably know that I'm changing my workflow a little bit. And Lightroom is starting to become the hub of things. And a lot of that is due to the headshot business, but it's not really changing much of what I'm doing overall. It's really just changing where I start. Today, we are going to jump into ON1. Now, if you are a Lightroom user and you have ON1 Photo Raw Max, then you can follow along with this same workflow where you click the image. Again, this was submitted to us by Keith Hill, who's a subscriber here to the channel. So thank you, Keith, for sending this image and allowing me to use it in a tutorial purpose to really showcase how we can remove some distractions inside of ON1 Photo Raw. And his concern was this lens flare over here on the right-hand side. Now, he was using an iPhone, and we'll look at the metadata when we get into ON1. But this is one of the common issues that at least I've experienced is lens flaring with iPhones. And, you know, they have different attachments or accessories you can use to hopefully overcome that particular issue. But I personally don't use them when I use my iPhone. I just kind of use the iPhone as it is, and I kind of clean it up in post, which is probably not the best way, but when I'm using my iPhone, it's just for fun for me, so it's okay. Now, like I mentioned, if you are using Lightroom and you also have ON1 Photo Raw Max, what you can do is select the image that you want to send into ON1 Photo Raw, and you can come up to File and then plug in extras, and you can see all of the plugins that I have available to me here. And I can just select ON1 Develop, ON1 Effects. This is if you're using any form of a plugin from ON1. So maybe in 2023 you have the plugin collection. I forgot what it's called. Can't think off the top of my head right now. But if you have ON1 Photo Raw Max, then you're good to go here. All right. Now, I'm not going to run it because I already opened this inside of ON1. There is another way that you can send your image to ON1, and that's through right-clicking, and then you can click Edit In, and then you can choose whichever one of these options that you want. Now, when you do it, I'm just going to go ahead and click Develop. You get this dialog box, and this dialog box, if you've made any edits to your photo inside of Lightroom, then you're probably going to want to edit a copy with the Lightroom adjustments. I don't recommend using the Edit Original, just because that is going to edit your original image, and that's probably not what you want to do. The reason we use these non-destructive editors is so we can get back to the original at a later date. Maybe you change your editing style years down the line, but if you edited the original, then guess what? You just kind of messed that up. So don't recommend it. But editing with Lightroom adjustments is what I check most of the time. And then sometimes I check edit with a copy. I only check edit with a copy when I really didn't do anything in Lightroom, and there's no point in creating an extra file with alpha channels and all that stuff, right? Or I'm sorry, the copy will not contain layers or alpha channels. So most of the time I leave it on this 95% of the time, and sometimes I choose edit a copy. Either way, you choose whichever one of those you want, and it'll go into ON1. Then of course you have your options of TIFF, PSD, or JPEG. Now, if you use the plugin manager, you also get the option of sending a DNG, which is a neutral raw file. All right. So every camera manufacturer has their own raw file system, or coding, casing, whatever you want to call it. And if you are photographing in RAW, so let's say you have a CR3 or an NEF or an ARW file or any other file where you need to send a raw image, converting it to a DNG could be the best way to go. But For this image, I actually sent it over as a JPEG because if you look over here, the file type that was sent was actually a JPEG. Then don't worry about color space unless you're like a super genius with color space. I don't worry about it. I leave it on Adobe RGB 1998. And then I also leave 16-bit checked with 300 resolution. Now again, as I mentioned, I already moved this into ON1 just to save time. So let's go over to ON1. Here we are. And as you can see, I have the image here open in ON1. I'm just going to make this a little bit larger. I'm not going to make it take up the entire screen because I have found that has slowed my computer down, and I don't want to slow the computer down. I'm live streaming. We're going to do some stuff that the computer is going to need some power, so I don't want to slow it down. However, now we're inside of ON1, and we're going to make some edits. Now, I have 2 copies on a layer. I just made that because I like to show before and afters, but I'll show you how ON1 2024 works. If you are in ON1 Photo Raw 2023, then making 2 copies is probably the best way of working with the tools that I'm about to show, or at least one of the tools. The reason for that, this is destructive, all right? I can't repeat that enough. Using the perfect eraser or the magic eraser, always get the name wrong, whatever it is destructive, which means you're not going to be able to get your edits back or your original image back. So you always want to make sure, and I highly recommend that you create a duplicate layer so that way you can get back to your original edit. So I'm just going to start working on this one. Let me just rename this edit. That way it's easy to tell which one is the original and which one is the edit. And the first step that I'm going to do is come over to, right now it's the clone stamp tool because I was using ON1 to do something else earlier. But you're going to click on the clone step tool. Most of the time it's going to be these double circles here. And hopefully that's coming through quite well. I can't zoom in on the stream, but it's going to have these double circles. Now, the keyboard shortcut by default is the letter Q on your keyboard. So if you click that, it's going to bring you to the healing brush. All right. What we want to do is click this little drop down arrow, and we're going to select the perfect eraser. Now, the keyboard shortcut by default is Shift and Q. You can always change that, but Shift and Q is what it is set to right now. So once you have that selected, it is so easy to get rid of this. I always recommend you go a little bit larger than the area that you actually want to remove. All right. So I'm going to go just a little bit larger on the outside to the left here. And because the outline here is red, it's kind of hard to see, but I'm just going all the way around this entire thing. And then I'm going to fill in the middle. And as soon as I let go with my left mouse click, the computer or ON1 is going to look at the pixels around it and say, okay, what should go here? Now, I will caution, this isn't always perfect the first time around, and you may have to do this a few different times. But for all intents and purposes, it did a great job here. Now, you know, for the person who wants to get like super critical about how this made the edit, you could say, hey, you know what? This looks a little fuzzy around here. Let's go to the zoom tool and let's zoom in on here real quick. So we're zoomed in to, looks like it is 100% or 200. We're zoomed into 200, right? Yeah. Okay. 200% on the image, and you can see that there's these streaks over here. I'm not sure that I would really do much of anything to try and correct this. But let's say you're like, you know what? I really need to fix that. Well, you could try and correct this by using, we'll come back. Let's hit the Q key. And let's see if we can fix this area with the healing brush, or I'm sorry, the retouch brush, I think is what it's actually called. So the retouch brush in ON1 works similar to a healing brush in other programs where you don't have to sample pixels or like copy pixels from one area to the other. And it kind of softens edges. Now, I recommend expanding the feather up to 100 when you do this. I find that gives me the best results. And I'm going to zoom in here, but I don't entirely recommend that you work zoomed in, unless, of course, you're going to be viewing the image at this zoomed in value. So I'm going to go ahead and brush over this harsh line. And let's see if the healing brush can kind of fade that in. And it's actually doing a pretty decent job of fading this harsh line into the image. And you can go over this a few different times. So, and I recommend varying your brush size. So I went with a smaller brush, then I'm going to go with a slightly larger brush. And this actually helps overall with the blending of the image or the edges when you use a small brush and then you go with a larger brush and then you go with a little bit of a larger brush, because think of it like a taper. If you're familiar with getting a haircut, you get a taper. They usually start off with something a little bit smaller and then they feather it out. So that way it starts to spread. And that's essentially what we just did. So let's go ahead and hit Command and 0 or Control and 0 if you're on a PC. And here we have that area kind of corrected. Now, let me show you the before and after, because it's always good to know where you came from and where you're going. So this is the before and this is the after. It does look a little odd, I'm not gonna lie. However, I don't think anyone would pay attention to that. And the goal with photo restoration and correction in most cases is to get rid of the big obvious thing in a way that is less intrusive. All right. I don't think anyone will notice this, and you let me know in the comment section below what you think. I'm, super indifferent. The only thing that and again, this is the reason why you want to be zoomed out. The only thing I think someone would notice is the duplicate of this little notch here and that little notch there. So how do you fix that? Well, this is where you go to the healing brush, which again, it doesn't work the same way as the healing brush or the retouching brush that we just used. All right. The healing brush actually requires you to paint over an area and then it's going to sample something. Now, I want to get rid of this notch altogether, so it's not there at all. And the way that I'm going to do that is, again, you could zoom in. I don't like to zoom in. I like to work zoomed out because I like to work at the viewing range of my image. It's a personal preference. You let me know what you like to do in the comment section below. But I'm going to make my brush about the same size as the item. And with the feather here, I recommend moving your feather. Probably for this, I would go 40%. I wouldn't go 100%. And let me show you why. So let me go 100%. And then I'm making my brush the size of the item. I'm going to click once. It's going to sample an area. And actually, that came out pretty good. So maybe 100% feather works well. But if you're working in a pretty textured area where you want to actually have some information or texture in that particular area, I recommend going with a smaller feathered brush. So that way the center of the brush, let me just make my brush really large here. All right. So if you see the center of my brush, it's like this really, really, really small dot. All right. However, if I come up here and I adjust my feather, and I'm going to bring it down to like 20. Now you can see the center of my brush is a lot larger, right? It's a lot larger, which means the center of the brush is going to retain as much of the texture information, and it's not going to start to feather until you get outside of the center of the brush all the way up to that outer ring, which is where the feathering is going to take place. All right. This is the reason why I do recommend using a smaller feather. So we're going to try and get rid of this other one using we'll go with a 44. The amount of feather is really relative to the image you're working on. Since we got rid of a lot of the texture in this particular area, I'm not overly concerned about that. And I'll show you how we can get back some of the texture if that's something you're really, really concerned about. But I'm going to go ahead and click here, and let's see what happens. So if you bring your mouse over to the right side, it gets rid of those overlays so you can kind of look at the image. So that got rid of that little notch. Now, let's say, you really want this texture back in the area. Well, one of the ways that you can do that, we'll go ahead and hit the little check mark up here at the top. So that way it closes that out. Now, I would say that this image is probably done as is, but if you say, well, no, I really want that texture back in this area, because if you look at the original image, there's some texture back here. Now, what's underneath this lens flare, nobody knows, but we could assume that the texture would probably be similar to what is over here. So let's jump back on to our edit layer. We're going to go to effects, and some of you may have already guessed it. We're going to go to the textures. All right. Now, the textures, there's all kinds of textures. Now, let me hide this for a second, and we're going to take a look at this particular thing. It looks like a log, so we're going to try and find something that resembles a log texture. All right. So let's go to category, and we might be able to find something in walls. I'm not entirely sure if we are going to be able to find something inside of walls, but let's go with, that's cracked paint. Maybe cracked earth. Yeah, that looks similar to what we have in that area. Now, we're going to bring down the opacity of this overall because I don't think that that texture is quite the same. And yeah, I think that'll work. So we're going to click on our mask, and we're just going to mask this into that area. So we'll click on masking, and we're going to invert the mask. And then we are going to hit Shift X to get our brush over to the paint option, formerly known as paint in. So if you're using one of the older versions of ON1, then yours will probably say paint in, but that's okay. And let me make sure my flow is up because I was doing something else. And yeah, okay. So now what we'll do is we will paint in this texture over here. And I think that that looks pretty good, relative. Now, one of the things that I'm starting to see is this color change, and I don't want to change the color. So what we're going to do is come over here to our blending options, and we're going to change this from normal down to luminosity. And there we go. And so that way the original colors of the image are really shining through, and the only thing that this is really doing is blending in with the lights and the darkness of the overall image. So let me show you the before and after of this section. There's before, and here is after. And I think it might be just a little too strong. So let's go ahead and pull that back, because the texture overall in this area is pretty subtle. So, you know, you got to kind of work with it. And I'm showing through a tutorial. If I was really like working on this, I would be spending probably a little bit more time trying to figure all of that out. Now, what is kind of odd is this stick that's coming through here. You know, I think that it makes sense for the stick to stop there. That's okay. But maybe you want it to extend the stick a little bit longer. Well, you'll have to go back into your erase tool. Or I'm sorry, not erase tool. Your clone stamping tool, and grab that. And then you'll resize your brush, hold down the Option key, and you can select a segment of the stick. So we'll go with this piece here. And you can see that I really just sampled a set of the pixels. All right. And what that's going to do is copy the pixels from the area that I just copied from. So it's going to copy the pixels from this area. And it is going to allow me to paint all these pixels in. And you can see this little crosshair to the left of my brush. That's sampling the pixels, and it's making a copy of them where the brush goes. So maybe we'll go like that. And then when I let go, ON1's going to do its best to kind of blend that in as much as it can. And you could see that that kind of works. It kind of doesn't. If, you know, that doesn't quite match with the lighting of that area, you can come in and do some, you can come in and do some local adjustments and kind of get that lighting to work. But I don't want to do too much with that in this particular video. So the last thing that I will do, so let's go out of there, is we'll come over to local adjustments, and I'm going to actually add in a gradient layer, or a gradient, I said layer, didn't really mean glare, right over here. And then we'll just turn this diagonal, and I'm going to feather this out and probably pull it back some. Because when you do this, maybe something like that, when you do that with a negative exposure, that area that we just removed the lens flare from, you could barely tell that we did anything. This doesn't even, and with that stick adjustment that we just painted in, it's also kind of hidden and gone. But if you find like, hey, it's kind of getting rid of this light trail that I really enjoy here, well, what you can do is we're going to turn on our overlay, and we're going to go with the red overlay. All right, this is going to allow us to see. There we go. So anything that's in red is not getting the effect. I wish that it was the other way around, because that is a lot easier to see. But, and of course we're working with red, so it would also be nice to change this overlay, or be able to change this overlay. So maybe that's not going to work the way that I expected it to. So we're going to turn that off, and we're just going to kind of eyeball this. The way that I'm going to eyeball it is I'm going to crank the exposure way, way down. All right. So anywhere that we see this red light come back, that means we've painted it away successfully. Now, there's a few ways of painting this light back. And one of the most appropriate ways for something like this that is linear is going to be the line mask tool, which the line mask tool made its debut, or re-debut. I don't know if that's the best way of saying that. It came back to ON1 in, I believe it was the 2022 version. Don't quote me on that. I should probably know, but I don't know off the top of my head. Nonetheless, the line mask tool is one of the best ways of doing something like this. Now, what I'm realizing is I need to pull this back up so that way I can see what it is that we want to paint out. So I'm actually going to increase the exposure, because that makes this red area really shine through in the image. Now we'll go back to our line masking tool by clicking on our mask, and grabbing our line mask tool. You could also use keyboard shortcut Shift and P. I have buttons that I use, but I'm not using my Elgato for this particular tutorial. All right, so we'll do something like this, and it's okay to come off the screen because that's how you make sure that you get. Now, why did that not? Come on, you can do it. There we go. All right, so we'll just trace along the light right here, and I'm gonna go like so because I think that that will do what I need it to do. All right, and I always get this confused. So I want to remove this. So I want to click on erase and then click in here, and that erased it from there. All right, perfect. So now what we're going to do is crank up on the feather because I want this to blend quite well with all of the areas. And I'm going to show you on the gray map here. So just bear with me because I know that I'm looking at some things and you're probably like, what are you seeing? So let's go ahead and hit the letter O. So you can see here, what I did is I painted away this area, leaving the effect of what I'm about to call the negative adjustment or negative exposure. I'm leaving that in touch. Now, I want this to come all the way to the edge. So what I need to do is just grab a brush. I think that's going to be the easiest way. And just paint this with a brush that is with a 100% feather brush. And I'm going to go Shift X. So that way I'm painting this out. That allows me to paint with black essentially. And I'm just going to do this all the way to the edge. And this doesn't have to be the absolute most perfect method. All right. So we'll go like that, hit the letter O. And now when I pull this exposure down, you can see that red light is really starting to come through. And it's not getting covered up by this negative exposure. So I'll back this off to the one stop that I think it was supposed to be at. We'll go right around here. And I think that we're good to go. So let me show you the before image. So turning off this layer, this is what we came into ON1 Photo Raw with. And here is what we're going to send back in to Lightroom. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the check mark, and I could do a ton of different things to this overall image. All right. But I'm just going to go ahead and hit the check mark. And this is going to take us back into Lightroom as it saves. So that's my ON1 catalog of things. Let's hit Command Tab. Come on. And let's go into Lightroom. There we are. Okay. So now my image should be coming back. And let's go into here. Of course, now it doesn't want to work. Promise I tested this before and everything worked just fine. But now for some reason, it's supposed to come back as a layer stack. So the good news is if you are using ON1 as a standalone, you won't have this problem to worry about. That's just a nuance that I'm not sure why that even worked that way. Let me check and see if it came into my tutorials folder. No, it did not. It's not back with this folder. So no worries. We're not going to make the video or the live stream any longer than it needs to be. So yeah, I have all of the adjustments, or I made the adjustments using ON1 Photo Raw. Normally, it comes right back into Lightroom, but for whatever reason, it just didn't want to do that today. And that's just the way that computers work. So I'll have to troubleshoot that and figure out where that image went. It's probably in my ON1 catalog somewhere. In fact, let me take a look and see, because it did pull up the catalog after I hit the check mark. So it probably put it into a folder in ON1, in which case, there you go, the folder's there. But the goal here was really just to show you how to remove those lens flares. But yeah, I'm not seeing it even inside of ON1. So I'll have to check and see if it's in the recents there, but no worries. Yeah, so let me know what your questions are down in the comment section below, and be on the lookout for videos and things of that sort. So until next time, I want you guys to stay inspired and keep creating. Peace.